So my name is Mary Campbell, and I'm here to talk to you about Mormon porn. Stereoscopic Mormon porn, no less, meaning images like these, images called stereographs, images that look three-dimensional if you see them through a special viewer called a stereoscope. Specifically, I'm here to talk about images by this man. This is the Mormon photographer and stereographer, Charles Ellis Johnson. We see him here in a self-portrait with his two sons. Johnson was born in 1857. He died in 1926. And as I said, he was a Mormon. He was a Latter-day Saint. He was not, however, just any saint. Instead, he played a very visible, actually really important role on the turn-of-the-century Mormon scene. Most notably, he married into the family of this man. This is the second Mormon prophet, Brigham Young. So Johnson was Young's son-in-law. In addition to this, Johnson spent about 20 years, the years between 1819 and 1910, working as one of the Mormon Church's favorite photographers. This is what Johnson did professionally. He was a church photographer. He made images like these, images of the Mormon temple, images of various Mormon holy men. In 1896, church authorities even sent Johnson on tour with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. The church authorities sent Johnson along to do two things. First, he was there to document the event, to take pictures of the tour. Second, he was there to chaperone the young women. Now, in retrospect, I'm willing to say this is probably not the best call the church ever made, right? Hindsight 2020. The same time that Johnson was keeping an eye on the Mormon scene, he was also making images like these. Softcore, stereoscopic erotica. Pictures of young women in seductive poses, sometimes draped in flowers, sometimes draped in bed sheets, occasionally engaging in a little light lesbianism. Never, however, I'm almost certain now, what the church assumed its favorite photographer and sometimes chaperone was doing in his spare time. And then harem images. Johnson loved pictures like these. Pictures of women posed as odalisques, women dancing with tambourines, women lounging, waiting for their sultans. In a way, Johnson was sort of the Mormon Rocky Mountain version of the 19th century French painter Ingres. Although if I actually get an Ingres up there, you see I'm cutting my man a fair amount of aesthetic slack. That said, like Ingres, Johnson specialized in this very particular orientalizing fantasy, the stereotypical fantasy of the East as a sensual, sexually available world. It's the same world we see here in this French postcard of a colonized Algerian woman. So Johnson's stereographs, they're softcore, no doubt. That said, they're tapping into this larger fantasy that upped their erotic ante. We've got a little more erotic upping going on here in Johnson's labeling. Johnson marked almost all of these images with both his name and his location, Utah. This reveals that this wasn't a private practice for Johnson. Instead, Johnson intended these images to go out into the larger world, a world that as a result of Mormon polygamy largely viewed the Mormons like this. As a result of Mormon polygamy, a good chunk of the nation imagined the Mormons as a hypersexualized, completely degenerate, orientalized menace, essentially a Mormon harem, an American harem, a fascinating, even erotic, and yet completely unacceptable affront to standard Western marriage practices. No one less than Mark Twain himself fantasized about this harem. Getting over into a more political realm, since we probably should take it to politics now, people fantasized in Congress as well. Admittedly, admittedly in a more kind of nightmare-style vein. Here we see a representative from New York panicking, absolutely panicking on the House floor that the Mormons were going to come and steal his woman, and then presumably his neighbor's woman and the rest of the country's. And then here in 1878, the Supreme Court holding that the First Amendment's free exercise protections didn't extend to the Mormons, and didn't extend because before the Mormons, polygamy was a practice of Asiatic people. It's important here to keep in mind that this vision of the Mormons as an Asiatic menace, it didn't just go away when the Mormons finally gave up polygamy in 1890. Instead, here we have another senator in 1905 declaring Mormonism to be the same menace to this country as it was from the beginning. Here again, in 1905, so roughly the same year that Johnson was making images like these. Images that certainly aren't up to Ang's rarefied French aesthetic standards, but that do seem perfectly poised to hit the collective American Mormon menace, Orientalized menace nerve, to hit it and to make it feel good, right? To make it feel seductive, erotic. Images like these, they're adopting the national image of the Mormons, that nightmarish, Orientalized vision that allowed the country to force the saints to give up polygamy, and they're twisting it into a vision of erotic pleasure. Sliding these stereographs into the stereoscope, we as viewers seem to enter a sensual, three-dimensional world, a world where we get to play sultan to a series of Mormon harem girls. When Johnson made this work then, he didn't just shoot dirty pictures behind his church's back. Instead, he made Mormon porn. He made images that revealed just how seductive the forbidden specter of the Mormon polygamist really was.